Greetings and good afternoon. My name is Kendall Hall, and I serve as the president of the Rutgers African American Alumni Alliance. On behalf of the Rutgers African American Alumni Alliance and the Rutgers University Alumni Association, welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon for a candid conversation with Dr. Anna Branch, Dr. Randal Pinkett, and Dr. Geoffrey Robinson on why Black leadership matters. Later this evening at 8 p.m., our AAA will host a live Q&A session with Dr. Robinson. Information about this session will be provided in the chat section. Drs. Randal Pinkett, Dr. Branch, and Geoffrey Robinson, thank you for your time today. Dr. Anna Branch is the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Rutgers University, and she will be moderating today's session. Dr. Branch, take it away.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to moderate today's Scarlet Community in Conversation session. I want to extend my thanks to both the Rutgers African American Alumni Alliance and the Rutgers University Alumni Association for organizing and supporting this event. Welcome to my distinguished discussants, who I want to take a moment to briefly introduce to you. Dr. Randal D. Pinkett has established himself as an entrepreneur, speaker, author, and scholar, and as a leading voice for his generation in business, technology, diversity, equity, and inclusion. He is the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of his fifth venture, BCT Partners, a multi-million-dollar research, training, consulting, technology, and analytics firm headquartered in Newark, New Jersey. BCT's mission is to provide insights about diverse people that lead to equity. The company has been recognized by Forbes as one of America's best management consulting firms. EY Entrepreneur of the Year, Incorporated 5,000 list of fastest growing private companies in America, and the Black Enterprise BE 100's list of nation's largest African American owned businesses. Dr. Geoffrey A. Robinson is an award-winning business school professor, international speaker, and entrepreneur. Since 2008, he has been a leading faculty member at Rutgers Business School, where he is an associate professor of management and entrepreneurship and the academic director of the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development. His research specialty lies at the intersection of business and society. His projects and initiatives address topics such as diversity, economic inclusion, inclusive entrepreneurship, and innovation, especially in urban metropolitan areas in the United States and abroad. Before we dive in, I want to note that the webinar is being captured and captioned. There will be time for audience questions at the end, collected via the comments. So please be thinking of the questions you have for the panelists that we'll draw from in our discussion towards the end. And with that, let's begin. Thank you all for taking the time today to join me for a conversation about why Black leadership matters. And I'm delighted to be in conversation with Geoffrey and Randal, who are distinguished in their respective fields and remain deeply connected to the banks. Thank you both for your leadership and your ongoing support of the Rutgers community. Can we start by taking a trip down memory lane? I'd love to hear a bit of your origin story. So tell me about your path to Rutgers and your experience as a student. The world knows you as Dr. Randal Pinkett and Dr. Geoffrey Robinson. But what made you you, Randal and Geoffrey? And how did you find each other?
I guess I can start, but before we start, just thank you for having us and for leading this discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. So, you say origin story, it makes you sound like somebody out of a Marvel comic book or something like that. We pretty humble beginnings. I looked back at some pictures and realized, I used to be a little thinner, had a little more hair. But I do remember when and where I met Randal. We're both engineering students. We went to Rutgers, College of Engineering at that time, School of Engineering now, and I think we were both told you should go to the meeting of the National Society of Black Engineers. I know somebody told my dad, and my dad said, yeah, make sure you go to the meeting as soon as you get on campus. So maybe the second week, maybe the first week of campus. I went to the meeting, and right at the beginning of the meeting, the president of the organization was another student. He said, make sure you know everybody who's sitting around you. Introduce yourself. And I turned around, and there was this tall, skinny Black guy behind me, and he said his name was Randal. At least that's how I remember it.
And that's absolutely right. And I want to thank you, Dr. Branch, for moderating today's discussion, and to our AAA and RAA, and to Kendall and Deniston and all those who've helped to bring this to fruition. But Dr. Robinson, Geoffrey did indeed capture our Marvel origin story. It was at that meeting of the National Society of Black Engineers, and there's a great line from Hamilton that says, "What are the odds the gods would put us all in one spot?" And I think that in many ways typifies our paths crossing serendipitously in that week, in that day, in that moment, and at that meeting. Because as you know, and as we'll discuss, it has been a lifelong relationship as brothers, as roommates, as business partners, and as co-authors.
Oh, awesome. So wonderful. So Rutgers, if we're going to go with Hamilton and Marvel, right, was this origin story, this place where it all began. And the National Society of Black Engineers, storied, illustrious organization, was kind of a meeting point. But what was Rutgers like? What was your first business? As a little birdie told me, there was a business that started on campus. Can you tell me a little about that?
Yes, so we were on campus in an era where Black consciousness was unfolding in a particular way. Hip hop had just come of age, and you had the emergence of several artists like Public Enemy and X-Clan and Boogie Down Productions. I'm dating myself, and I'm dating him too. That had a message of Black empowerment. An event called Black Expo was touring around the country, highlighting Black entrepreneurs. We were wearing red, black, and gold and dashikis. And I mean, there was a whole ethos around the Black community at Rutgers. And we got swept up in that. And the president of the National Society of Black Engineers then was a gentleman named Wayne Abbott. Wayne started a business as a student, inspired Geoffrey, myself, and our two business partners, Lawrence and Dallas, to start a business. And we looked around to see what was missing on campus. And the birdie told you what we'll tell the audience. We sold what is now an old relic called compact discs. In fact, I have one right here next to me. I got Michael Jackson.
What is that, right? What is that, Daddy?
Yeah. So we sold compact discs out of our dorm because there was no store on campus. And even back then in the 90s, we were next day delivery. So if you ordered it on Monday, we could deliver it to your dorm on Tuesday. We bought them at $8, sold them at $12, and made $4 a disc. And then we parlayed that to using the proceeds to fund outreach to high schools, which NSBE had been doing. We took it on and amplified it, going to schools throughout New Jersey, encouraging young people to go to college, including to come to Rutgers.
Oh, I love that story. It's so many pieces I want to pick on, but let's pick up on consciousness, right? Because you came of age, right? Both personally and at Rutgers in a moment of rising collective consciousness about what it meant to be Black, Black empowerment. So the Rutgers and that moment in time was a part of it. But Geoffrey, if I turn to you, what part of that consciousness was pre-Rutgers, right? Are there any elements where that came from you that kind of birthed that consciousness?
Yeah, that's a great question. Randal and I share an experience of having parents who grew up came of age in the 60s, really, right? And both our sets of parents, we were born in cities. I was born in East Orange. Randal was born in West Philly, and then after a couple of years, they moved us to suburbs of New Jersey, and in my case, Parsippany, in his case, East Windsor, where we were the only ones, the one of a few. In my elementary school, it was Raheem, Tucker, and me. That was it in terms of Black people. So there's a little bit of dissonance. We were growing up, and our first book, we talk a bit about being the Black faces in white places. So the consciousness that I received had to come through my parents, because I wasn't getting it in school or from the environment. It had to come through people at church. It had to come through other means. And I remember my father sitting me down one time and saying, "You need to watch this." And it was the PBS special, eyes on the prize to understand a little bit of the arc. And I didn't get everything, but I realized there was a history there that I needed to understand. So fast forwarding a bit, getting on campus, it was nice to be in a place where I could find some other, as I thought about it at the time, other smart Black people, people like me, trying to get a degree. The Rutgers chapter of NSBE is known as the Minority Engineering Educational Task Force, and Meet Rutgers NSBE is really a great place, and still is, for people to develop academically, professionally, technically, and culturally. And that's why we gravitated to it. We learned things. We pulled that into us. That combined with the Paul Robeson Cultural Center and the fraternities and sororities and the parties, we have parties too, and the events and the speakers who would come to campus, some controversial, some not. I mean, all of that was right there. And when we had to mobilize, we mobilized. We were right at the end of a lot of the protests around apartheid. Against apartheid. And then certainly Rodney King was another large event that happened during the time we were at Rutgers. And Rutgers students, including a lot of the Black students, organized and were active in these pursuits.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And some of you in the audience may be wondering, like, what does this kind of history, this origin story, I'll stick with my theme, have to do with leadership now? I think we're going to make the argument in this conversation, it has everything to do with it. And so I'm going to turn to you, Randal, and ask you to build on that a little bit. That why did it matter for you? What came out of that kind of consciousness, the engagement, the meeting? Why did it matter? As you think, you dropped a nugget in about your first book. Why did it matter to prepare you to be a Black face in a largely white place?
Absolutely. And you've had this lived experience now where you sit as a senior vice president. Mm-hmm. And the chief equity officer. When we went and interviewed dozens of African Americans like you, Anna, and asked them to reflect back on the key strategies or strategic actions that prepared them to be a Black face in a high place, the foundational strategic action was around self-determination. And it's this idea that if you haven't figured out who you are and where you're going, who you are being your identity, where you're going being your purpose, then by the time you arrive as a Black face in a high place, if you haven't done that inner work, it is too late. It's far too late. And we think of identity as an anchor. It helps to ground you. And we think of purpose like a compass. It helps to guide you. So if I think of that, and I think of winds blowing, and those winds only becoming more violent, more aggressive, more turbulent as you get higher in your career. If you're not anchored and you don't know where you're going, those winds will easily uproot you or will easily take you off track. And Rutgers gave us that foundation. I mean, our parents did in our upbringing, but Rutgers helped solidify our identity, which we know, college is such a critical, pivotal point in the formulation of one's identity that Rutgers helped to reinforce that for us.
Awesome. So much you said there that we're coming back to. We're the anchor, compass, identity, purpose. We're coming back to those nuggets. But before I do, I actually want us to step a bit back, which is it's Black History Month. We're in a fitting moment to think about what does Black leadership look like right on a national stage. And there are challenges, right? So if we look at the Fortune 500 landscape, there are only 5 Black women and men who are leading Fortune 500 companies. And so what do you say to those who ask, why does it matter? And I ask that because you just noted self-determination and knowing who you are and where you're going as important. But for those who say, why does it matter who's at the top? What do you say?
Well, let me weigh in on that one. We just wrote an op-ed for a website called blavity.com. You can find it, and it has a similar title, Black Leadership Matters. And for us, that Fortune 500 list is somewhat symbolic, but there's an economic substance to that. I mean, those 500 U.S.-based companies constitute two-thirds of the gross domestic product of America. That's a lot of resources they control. It's like 250,000 or 280,000 people who are employed by these companies, these 500 companies. And 1%, literally 5 out of the 500 are Black. So the reason that it matters is because that the economy is driven by a lot of these types of companies. So who's participating? If we know already that there are 12 or 13% by population in America that call themselves Black, so we should at least be able to see some parity in those numbers, but we don't see that. So it should make us ask. It should make us ask why. It should make us ask some questions about what's happening inside of corporations that's preventing or delaying the rise of Black executives. And from a very specific place, I believe that when you are conscious of your identity, you're also thinking about how you might be able to impact that community. And what one of the things we profile in our new book is we talk about some of the Black faces in these high places and what they've been able to do to not only meet their organization's goals, but also to support the initiatives and the desires of the Black community. And it runs the gamut. That to me is why it matters. When Black people get to the tops of their organizations, it is not only a symbolic position of inclusion, but it literally makes the way for other people and other identities to feel more at ease, more comfortable, and to make a difference in the world.
Thank you. And so I'm going to ask you to go deeper, right? So you said in passing it matters, and you said that leaders lead. Can you give me some examples? Can you point to something that helps make it real for folks of why it matters who's at the top?
Absolutely. And just an assist to my brother, Dr. Robinson, the Fortune 500 employs 28.7 million employees worldwide. That's the latest data. I think about Oprah Winfrey is a wonderful example, and we profile Oprah in the book. Oprah's one of my greatest role models. As a younger entrepreneur years ago, I looked to her for inspiration and for motivation. And I think about what Oprah has been able to do with wealth. And I love a quote that she has. I won't quite get it right, but she responded to someone criticizing her for her brand of philanthropy. And her response was, "Who are you to tell me what to do with my money?" And I just kind of tipped my hat and said, you know what? Hey, she calls it like she sees it. But I think about Oprah's School in Africa for Girls as just one of many examples. Her Angel Network as another example. Oprah has been able to, and what she's done for HBCUs, I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. It's because she's been able to amass wealth. She is a Black face in a high place. She has levers at her disposal, and she calls the shots on how to pull those levers. If it matters to her, she invests in it. If it is meaningful to her, she supports it. And she can literally transform any single institution just by saying, I'm going to lend my name, my support, my media exposure, my wherewithal, my brand behind your organization or your person. So I think Oprah's a classic example. And that's one of the reasons we profile her, because you have this sense that Oprah knows who she is, and a magic word, and she's unapologetic about who she is.
So many threads. I want to kind of go back to the one I said before about identity and purpose, because I think Oprah is also a really great way to kind of build on what you said, right? So you told us before that identity is your anchor, right? It's what grounds you, and purpose is that compass. In the tale you were just telling, kind of recounting Oprah's path, when other people look at the Oprah story, right, the model, what do you want them to take away explicitly from why identity and purpose matter?
Well, there's a lot there. I mean, she embodies some of that authenticity that everybody loves about her, right? There's nobody who's going to doubt who she is, and she puts it out there on the regular basis. So now, when you interact with Oprah, at whatever level you are, whether you are the people who are in monarchy, or the people who are on the street, or at the HBCU, or any place else, you know who she is. That authenticity is powerful. And when we talk to young people, especially who are thinking they want to go and work in a large company. And one of the things they worry about is, can I bring my whole self there? When we talk to executives who've been around for a while, they are often lamenting, oh, I don't feel as if I can bring my whole self to this place. And one of the challenges for corporations is to be able to realize that when people bring their whole self, they're getting more out of them, that has value, that's an asset, and it's not a liability. But often corporations, large organizations, sort of institutions that have some of these rigidities to them are losing out because people are trying to do all of this self-management that leads to a lot less productivity than they could get if they were giving them more, allowing them more to be themselves. So there's a lot of threads there, but the main point is, can you figure out who you are, and then you start developing your career from there, as opposed to trying to find yourself later on, which some people try to do as well.
That's awesome, and I want to build on it, because part of what you said there is organizations constrict, right? So that it's both about how individuals are shaping and choosing how to show up, but there's something happening in corporations and companies that are also limiting how many Black executives get to the top. So can we talk about that? What's going on? Why only 5?
Yeah, we talk about these 4 dimensions of racism, which one could also recast as 4 types of barriers that exist within organizations: personal, interpersonal, institutional, and systemic. Personal barriers are people's beliefs. What we believe can be a barrier not only to others, but to ourselves. For example, if I believe or was taught that Black shouldn't be in engineering, I can be a barrier to myself, and I can be a barrier to my kids. Second is interpersonal, and that's how we behave, our behaviors. We talk about discrimination, harassment, bullying. These are behaviors that can be barriers. Third, I think, is perhaps the most ignored, and that's the institutional barriers. And here we're talking about culture, policy, practice. What schools do we recruit at? Which ones do we not? Do we legislate diverse interview panels or interviewers, or do we not? And I see you shaking your head, Dr. Branch. And those institutional barriers often get obscured because we focus so much on the personal, interpersonal. When Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, everyone pointed at Chauvin, but what about the department that allowed Chauvin to exist? That's an institutional barrier. And then lastly is systemic barriers, which are those barriers that replicate themselves across multiple institutions. Think health inequities and health disparities. Think disproportionate sentencing laws that cut across multiple courts and legal systems. And so it is all 4 of those barriers, Dr. Branch, that produce certain outcomes. And so to me, the 5 Black CEOs is a symptom of several deeper sources. And the sources of the symptom are personal, interpersonal, institutional, and systemic barriers.
Love it. I'm shaking my head because there's not enough time for all of the places I want to go with that commentary. But I'm going to draw on one that is in kind of popular discussion right now to pick up on institutional. Because personal and interpersonal, as you've noted, we can see. At least it's happened, right? You know it's happening. But the institutional can be a bit more abstract to grasp. So let's talk about the NFL. All right. So NFL as an institution has a role, the Rooney Rule. And even me, as a non-sports aficionado, is familiar with the Rooney Rule, which requires the NFL in any search for a head coach position to interview a candidate of color. And at the same time, there's a kind of public awareness of there's still not many, right? So even when you've got policies in place, right, that would require a diverse slate doesn't lead to selection, right? And so there's some challenges. So how do we account for that? What do we do with kind of the institutional dimensions of this? And here I particularly want to talk about, what do non-Black leaders need to do? Because it's one thing to be ready, it's one thing to show up, it's one thing, that is the personal interpersonal management that an aspirational Black leader can manage. But that institutional requires awareness of everybody else.
It certainly does. And let's just stay with this piece about the NFL. I want to point out that, there's two levels here that are really interesting to hone in on. The Rooney Rule specifically deals with the head coach and the hiring of the head coach. But let's not forget about the owner level of the NFL, which doesn't have any Black owners. And there may be one in the near future, but we don't have one right now. But the challenge that we all have right now with the Rooney Rule is, yes, it stipulated that you have to interview. But what we're finding out from the whole Brian Flores it's giving us some more insight into what's happening is, yeah, they do it, but they have no intention of doing the hiring. So now it's a farce. It's okay. We're going to consider somebody, but it looked like the fix was already in. We're going to do it for appearance's sake, but we're not going to hire Brian or any other person of color. So where's the problem? The problem's on multiple layers there, right? I don't have Black ownership with a league that has 60-70% of the players are Black, and there are no Black owners. So there's something wrong with that. Head coaches, we got one, and then we're hearing that maybe the process is already rigged with biases in it. And so you spoke to what do some of our non-Black colleagues do? Sometimes back to the Hamilton comments before, they're in the room when it's happening. And somebody must have said, yeah, we're going to do all these interviews, but we really want this guy. We're not going to, even though we got to do this Rooney Rule stuff, we're not. Somebody in there should have said, no, that's not the way we should do it. That, people throw the word around allyship. We want, we want to be an ally to Black professionals. And what allyship really means is dismantling barriers that lead to some of these inequities. The inequity, part of the problem is in that room, nobody stood up and said, that's not the way we should be doing these sets of interviews. And because of that, because somebody was silent and didn't say anything, and again, I know there's risk involved there, but sometimes that is what it takes to start to shake up what are institutional forces. What are forces that are mounted or amassed against us in organizations that all of these biases, implicit or otherwise, lead to? That's what it takes. Yeah. Now I know, Dr. Pinkett talks about this stuff all the time. I don't know if he wants to add something to that, but that's how I feel about it.
The only thing I would add is, to your point about allyship, we can think about it at the micro and the macro level. The micro level for allyship is, I'm sanctioning a disparaging comment. I'm making sure to make clear what's in bounds and out of bounds as acceptable behavior within our culture. It's the microaggressions that are being held in check. But at the macro level is what you talked about, Dr. Robinson. It's asking the tough questions. Well, where are our dollars being spent for procurement? And how is it that interview panel is all men? Like, it's those macro level questions that speak to your point, Dr. Branch, about the institutional barriers, and we cannot ignore across the entire umbrella of this, to just punctuate it, is this idea of ownership. It gets back, it gets back to Oprah's comment: "Who are you to tell me what to do with my money?" And colloquially speaking, what the NFL owners are saying is, "Who are you to tell me what to do with my team?" Right?
Okay, we can't move on yet, because part of what came up in both of yours that I just want to pull out and put a note on was, what do folks get to do with discomfort? So on the kind of micro, to use your levels, right? The micro level, that I'm comfortable disrupting when it's public, when it's visible, when it's easy to say that's bad and you should do that, right? So that's a kind of micro level disruption. But kind of comfort, right? A willing to stay silent on kind of larger scale, kind of institutional systemic disruptions where it doesn't bother me. There wasn't a wrong person or action. There wasn't there. So there's this room of discomfort being a luxury. Not all of us get to exercise, right? Not all of us have that choice to stay silent. So what do you say to those who say, I am supportive of Black leadership. I am committed to the kind of being active in this moment, right? I don't want to take the racial reckoning that was 2020 for granted, but I'm not sure where do I start, right? Because in this group of people that are listening and talking with us today, we've got groups of people who have some level of agency and power. What do you say to them about how they use it?
Well, the fact is, I say they should use it. That, having power, power is something we don't always often talk about, at least not in the context of thinking about how to change the systems of around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So power is certainly tied up with the whole conversation at the top. It's implicit. It's there. We've got people who are in the room who are able to affect their peers and to make changes in policy. Now that takes some guts, but you got there already, and and to be there as a non-Black, as typically we're talking about somebody who's white and male in the room making a lot of decisions, and now you have to ask yourself, what do I stand for? People start making these jokes or making these comments. Am I going to sit here and take it? At the same time, we often want this to be something that only Black people are working on. We'll bring somebody in, we'll let them rise to the top, and then they got to deal with all of that stuff, as if they can deal with all of the problems of your institution or your organization. Right. And it can't be just the Black people or the people of color who are working on these issues. It's got to be concerted effort. I've been at Rutgers Business School for now 14 years, and every step of the way, I've had mentors, and I think of them as the board of directors who've informed my work, and it's always been that there has been allies. There have been people who look like me, people who didn't look like me, who were thinking about how to change the organization or the system to make it better for faculty, for staff, and for students. So that is a model for me for how you can make some changes.
Awesome. That's so important. And I want to take us to another side. If we switch shades and color this a bit, we focused on kind of our orientation to the top, right? How we got there, origin stories, a bit about the kind of climate at the top, right? What's happening, what's keeping so many out, and limitations. And I love the breakdown, right, of the personal, interpersonal, institutional, and systemic. So now let's shift a little bit to the kind of personal, the intra piece of this, around how we understand ourselves. We started there, right? That the formative years, the consciousness, the role of self-determination. But there are things that are within our control, right? And so can we have a kind of honest conversation about what's within our control that keeps us from getting to and staying at the top?
It's a great question. And one of the gifts that Dr. Robinson gave me as we were writing this book was when we were writing on Strategic Action 3, or to be more specific, we divided and conquered. So he wrote Strategic Action 3. and then I reviewed it and said, great job. And he came across this construct out of Japanese origin called Ikigai, Ikigai, Ikigai. And we talk about what's in your control, and Ikigai translated means meaning. And in the first book, we talked about excellence and this amalgam of your passion and your gifts and your discipline and your faith. But Ikigai took it on to a whole new level. Ikigai speaks to, what are you good at? What is the world looking for? How can you make money? And what do you love to do? And it's at the intersection of all of these things. And at the center of the Ikigai diagram is meaning. It's like finding this interplay between how you see yourself, what the world could benefit from, and how you can make a living at doing it. And I think that's all well within our control. But to your question, there's a deep introspection that's required in order to process a concept like Ikigai. And I don't think it's a destination. I think it's a journey. I think we're constantly evaluating and reevaluating what is our meaning as a function of where we are, our stage in life, the values and the societal conditions that exist around us. But it was a wonderful gift, and I encourage anyone to look it up, because we both have found it personally valuable, and we embedded it in the book. We thought that the readers would also find it equally valuable, and that's all within our control.
Awesome, that's so helpful. And I'm going to kind of bring back in the discussion we're having about institutions. How do you hold on to ikigai when you're struggling with racism? Right, that because I can be centered and clear on who I am and what I bring to the world, and be wanting to use that thing I bring to the world to make money, and be dealing with kind of obstacles and challenges. How do you counterbalance to make sure you go forward?
Oh yeah, that's a great question, because it points to something else that is evident in people we've profiled, and even in our own experience. It's not a solo effort. People sometimes feel isolated, and that's a bad place to be. You're isolated, and you're facing all kinds of racism, and people are devaluing you in your work life. That is a terrible place to be. You need to have some people around you in your network who are speaking some life into you, who are counterbalancing some of those negative narratives. That certainly helps. But let's put it all out there. I mean, if that's what you're facing, there aren't that many options. We talk about, and we've been saying for years, there are lots of ways to deal with racism in the workplace. We think of the 4 Fs. You can fight it, which takes a lot of energy, and sometimes has some costs that go along with it.
Brian Flores.
You can forego it. You say, hey, look, I'm not going to deal with this now. I'm going to deal with it later when I get to a more substantial situation. Yeah. Some people say, I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to fly out of here. It's flight. I'm going to get out of here, and it's literally leave that company or leave that situation and move to another. Sometimes you can move internally. Sometimes people move into other companies. And then the last one is, if you think you've got some relationship with the people who are making some of these offensive remarks or doing things, and that we're talking about microaggressions and outright racist statements. You could try to friend them, and that takes another type of fortitude, right? So fight, flight, forego, or friend. And here's the challenge. This is some calculus that we're doing all the time. I say we, representing Black professionals. We're doing this all the time, thinking about this kind of thing. And there was a recent study, and Dr. Pinkett probably knows the numbers better than me, that was making some estimates about how much racism and racist policies cost America in terms of lost productivity, lost dollars, lost potential. And it was billions of dollars. And for me, that tells part of the story. Companies need to wake up. Organizations need to wake up and realize that some of the movement that they're seeing during this, people are calling it the Great Resignation. Some of the movement they're seeing is because they see all of these inconsistencies in the policies and the positions of their companies that they're working in. They don't want to do it anymore. They're creating their own companies and moving to companies that do it better.
Yeah. And the one thing I want to punctuate off that point, Dr. Robinson, is our argument in Black Faces in High Places is the higher you find yourself within an organization, the more opportunity and responsibility you have to fight. That you cannot go through your entire career only friending, foregoing, and flighting. That if you cannot look back on your career, that at some point you fought for something, then you've lost sight of the fact that the reason you were there is because somebody fought for you. And if everyone forgoes, everyone flies, everyone friends, the status quo will remain.
So I think you have said in a sentence why Black leadership matters. Right? That sentence is, at the end of the day, Black leadership matters because it is often Black leaders in organizations who are challenging the status quo. It's not always, right? And it's not taken for granted because there are many non-Black champions for change. But because Black leadership often makes challenge visible, right?
Mhm.
And that those set of options, I love the 4Fs frame. You guys are wizards of the acronyms, right? But that 4F frame, that choice to fight, that willingness to say, this can be different, this can be inclusive. I think that's our one sentence statement on why Black leadership matters. And it has a cost. So you said, Dr. Robinson, that it's costing America, but it's also costing us personally, right? The loss of kind of brain space and focus and energy, and the cost of getting there and not staying there, because there's a whole different level that you're not ready for, you can't even anticipate, right, at times when you get to the top. So can we talk about that? I want to use the analogy of atmospheric pressure, right? The higher you go, right, the greater the pressure that you experience. And if you're in a plane while the pressure is rising, you can chew some gum, you know what's happening, but you are in a place where the pressure is contained. You don't feel the shifts in the same way. In leadership, there is no plane. Right? You're just there. Right? You encounter and you feel all that force. And the hard part is not everybody survives it well. So can we talk about those challenges a bit?
Yeah, I love your analogy of the plane and atmospheric pressure. I remind my kids when we're on a flight that the first plane, and of course even the subsequent planes, were not this smooth a ride. Let's be clear. Like you take for granted all of the engineering and evolution that has gone into creating a very smooth ride, when outside that window is turbulence to the nth degree. So if I piggyback off your analogy and say that the hull of the plane begins with your identity and your purpose, like the strengthening of how you smooth out that ride begins there, I'd say the very next layer of protection is the inner circle that surrounds you. We call it leveraging our might, strategic action number 6 in the book. But that inner circle of people that become, as Dr. Robinson mentioned, your board of directors, your sounding board. Back in the day, we might have called it your crew, your posse, your boys, your girls. That same metaphor applies. And I would argue once again that the higher you get, the more important it becomes, because you're making big ticket decisions. You're taking big swings at the plate. And if it's just you in your isolation and in your vacuum, trying to figure out what to do and what to say and how to respond, or how to calm yourself down from what just happened in that meeting, if you don't have that inner circle, that strength in numbers, that leveraging our might that we talk about, then you've lost a layer of protection, and that ride is going to be turbulent.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to that. Often people come to us. We speak all around the country, and especially on topics like these. And a Black professional will come to me and they'll say something like, "Oh, I'd love to have a mentor, but because you guys talk about mentoring, but all the people in the top of the organization where I'm at, nobody looks like me, so I don't feel as if I can find a great mentor." And I usually push back on that, and I say to them a couple things. First of all, get rid of old school thinking about mentoring, that you need to have one mentor, one person who's all knowing. You got to think about it like a portfolio. You're going to have a network of mentors, multiple people who are looking out for you. Some of them may be just like you, and you can relate to them on a personal level, talking about the experience of being a Black professional, a man or woman. You can talk about that, but then you can also need other people who are some people might say, those allies who are looking to give you knowledge. They got other kinds of knowledge that will be important for that rise up in the organization. So all those people that in situations that Randal was just talking about, don't forget, you need to think about multiple mentors, multiple people. That personal board of directors can be very diverse, and it may be people inside your organization or company or outside. Or if you're an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs need mentors too. And those mentors are there to provide that kind of support and advice and sponsorship and that knowledge that helps you to navigate those plateaus at the top of the organization.
So important. We're getting ready to turn to audience questions. So if there's anything that you want to make sure that we have in these last few minutes, be sure to drop a question out there for us now. But before I switch gears, I want to highlight one more thing you were saying about mentors, and actually both to build on it, about what those look like. So we've been having this conversation about Black leadership, right? Why Black leadership matters with a nuance. I can see in some of the comments already, people are extremely grateful for. What I want to add to that note is what can be missing sometimes at the top. And I think that the apprehension behind the comment of there's no one at the top that looks like me is people are looking for resonance with their experience. And so I'm going to ask you to kind of pinpoint a bit more, because not everyone's going to resonate with your experience, right? As you've noted. So to be clear on what are the different things that you need is what I would say add on, and then go about that work of kind of getting it, because they can add something really different. Because what do you say, and you talked about it in passing, I'm going to ask you to say a bit more about what did non-Black mentors, colleagues, sponsors even do for both of you in your ride to Black leadership, in your rise to Black leadership?
Yeah, I want to cite one of the studies we reference in the book. David Thomas, who's now president of Morehouse, former scholar at Harvard, one of his studies compared minority executives to minority managers who plateau. And one of the findings, among many very powerful findings, is that minorities who reach the top statistically have more diverse relationships and mentors than minority managers do. Not only that, but what he found was the minority managers tended to have mentor networks and social networks that were either all Black or all white. And both an all Black network of relationships and an all white network of relationships both did a disservice to minority managers. Only the heterogeneous network served the minority executive well. So that I want to put a pin on that. But to your question, let's be clear about the difference between mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship, which are often conflated.
Yep.
Mentorship is about development, your development. Sponsorship is about advancement, you having access to new opportunities that push you higher into the organization. Allyship, as Dr. Robinson, is about dismantling the barriers that might impede your development and your advancement. And so we've had both mentors and sponsors throughout our careers who have helped us to develop and who have opened doors, kicked down doors, had doors that they controlled, that they just invited us to walk into those doors. I think about how many of the early contracts at BCT Partners would not have been possible were it not for someone who looked like me on the inside of an organization saying, I'm going to give you this contract, or I'm going to award you this contract, when it would have been impossible for us to have that opportunity otherwise. And so the allyship conversation, which we're having a more heightened discussion around now in the post-George Floyd era, I think we're now seeing a greater acknowledgement, to your earlier point, Dr. Branch, of what are the barriers, systemic and institutional. And now Dr. Robinson and I are engaged in activities, including a Redefine the Game Institute that is kind of helping to empower Black professionals to educate and equip equal partner allies that we can all work together in dismantling the barriers that exist.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to that. Just from my own experience, as you mentioned, there are people who are going to be in the room when you're not in the room. Conversations about evaluations, conversations about promotions, conversations about who gets the funding for your particular project and things. And that's why you need to have people who are sponsoring you, who are giving you some insights so that you can prepare the right packet. I remember distinctly a time in my own academic journey as a professor where my mentor, Dr. Jerome Williams, who passed about a year ago, rest in peace, he talked me down from a very, what I thought of as a very explosive situation. I remember something happened. I won't go into all the details, and I was hot about it. I'm like, we say we're about diversity and we're trying to hire people, and I hear people say things like this. And I go to him, I talk to him. Fortunately, he talked me down. He said, okay, hold on. He said, let's look at this and figure out what to do. And the little delay that we put into the plan, instead of me just going, trying to storm the castle, you might say, of the dean's office or whatever, he talked me and gave me some insight. And actually, what I found out later was he actually intervened and handled the situation himself. And that means you've got somebody who's giving you insights and showing you strategies that actually work to make the changes. The changes happen. One was a Thursday. The next thing happened by by the next Monday, the whole situation was changed because he was in place. He helped me to understand how to do it. And now, as someone who is his successor as the Prudential chair over at Rutgers Business School, it helps me to understand how to really make impacts in large organizations.
Absolutely. And I'll add to our previous discussion, it illustrates what fighting looks like, right? For others, when you're like, well, which ways did I fight? That's another way fighting looks like. Moving to the chat, there was a really interesting reaction to our earlier conversation about authenticity. So we're going to double back there. And the comment that I want to highlight, there's two, relate to, given the institutional harm we've acknowledged and those barriers, they're not deserving of the authenticity. So how do you kind of negotiate being your full authentic self when there's institutional work to be done? And that harm, another person said it as, when an institution is unsafe in a multitude of ways, it's difficult to be your whole self. What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's a really important point, because the authentic self vernacular is a bit idealistic, and I say that with all deference to the ideal, because first of all, none of us bring our whole selves to lots of places. I mean, if I brought my whole self to places, I'd scare people away.
I can attest to that.
And there's some things I need to hide from other people, personally and professionally. Let's just keep that real. But to the word that Dr. Robinson used around calculus and the 4 F's, we do have to find a place of reconciliation and a place of relative comfort while accepting discomfort. In other words, that the cost of compromising myself cannot be but so high, and we all draw that line in different places. Some of us, and I would argue this, I think that to reach the kinds of places that a Dr. Branch reaches, you actually have to have a high tolerance for the ability to negotiate and to not draw the line too far, but be willing to negotiate the line as you move through your career and not see it as a compromising of yourself. So I think we all have to figure out, where is our line drawn? How far am I willing to go where I'm not feeling like I am myself, where I feel like I am someone other than myself? And therein lies the 4 F's. Do I take flight? Do I forego it and see how much longer I can navigate? Do I friend someone, although it's not really an option on identity negotiation, or do I fight to say, you're going to accept my braids, you're going to accept, my hairstyle, you're going to accept my imperfections, and know that there are always implications on when you choose to fight, and in what organizational environment you choose to do so.
Yeah, I just got to throw something in. I know we want to get to some more questions, but we make those accommodations for others. But when it comes to Black people, indigenous people, people of color, then all of a sudden it's a problem. And that is where I had to put the companies on the spot, because when they don't make those kinds of inclusive environments, I've got plenty of books that document all of the challenges of being a Black professional, what it feels like. And you can search YouTube and see little videos about all of these things. That's why companies need to be put on blast to make it a more comfortable environment, instead of working out of their discomfort and saying, oh, I'm not comfortable with you when you do stuff like that. They need to be a bit more accommodating of everybody else to make it an inclusive environment.
I so appreciate that. And if I were to kind of put a bow around it, it's the negotiation of self. And I would say that you don't get so good at kind of hiding yourself from the world that you hide yourself from yourself, right? That's like, who am I, right? What do I really believe in? What do I really stand for? So for those of you trying to figure out this conversation around authenticity, there's some nuance, absolutely, kind of get and read the book. But it's a point that's really important. I want to go to another question in the comments that asked about having power. Do Black leaders in organizations, your assessment, I'll take the question to be, do they have power or just titles? And how do you negotiate and know the difference?
Yeah, there is a difference between just having positional power, where you have a place in the hierarchy, or whether you are really influential in your organization. And I usually bring in that you need to have position power and personal power. Personal power relies upon more than just where you are on the org chart. It's about relationships. It's about expertise. It's about reputation. All those things can lead to power. But you don't want to be, people are calling it these days the glass cliff. You break through the glass ceiling, you giving a position, and then it's a situation where you're set up for failure. That nobody wants to be in that situation. So, one of the things we speak about is you can't just have a network, but you also need to build power with that network, because that's how you get things done. And if you get to a position and you haven't forged those relationships, that's a problem, because that's not going to put you in the most powerful position in order to affect change.
All right, I got a rapid fire questions. I'm going to fit in a few more. First one, how do you find the mentor or sponsor, or do they find you?
I think it's a combination of both. I believe you get back what you put out, and I believe in the law of attraction at the same time. So I think when you demonstrate excellence, you are much more likely to attract someone as a mentor or sponsor. But I also believe when you're intentional with others about what you're looking for, seeking out alumni networks, members of your faith-based community, asking for referrals, doing informational interviews, that much like dating and looking for a romantic relationship, and you got Match.com and eHarmony and the like, the more you're able to be intentional in what you're looking for in a mentor, what kind of development, et cetera, I believe that they will find you as well.
I'm going to wrap a little bit into this last question and give you both a minute to answer before we're at time. Can you believe it? And I want to wrap up about care, right? We've been talking a bit about care, but this question puts a little bit of a note on it. And it says, for entrepreneurs, right, in the race and inclusion space, consultants, practitioners, and DEI, how do we continue to pour into our businesses, our teams, our clients, and our families? And I want to ask this question also in the light of the kind of moment that we're in, where we're seeing a lot of self-harm and kind of cracking under pressure. So can we talk about this? I'm going to ask you both kind of holistically, how do you care, right? How do you make sure you're pouring back into yourself to support your growth? Yeah,
self-care, really, really important. We talk a bit about this because we talk about some examples of people who got to the top and, definitely had some issues and problems. You have to have some other people beyond that work life that are, part of your self-care system. I call it a system. What is it that you're doing to get poured into yourself? How are you taking breaks? Sometimes we got to take a vacation. You can't work all the time. Who are we talking to? Is it your circle of friends that you regularly talk to? Is it a therapist? Is it a church or religious community? All of those things matter and can constitute your system of care. And sometimes we gotta take a step back and think about, who do I need to talk to? Don't struggle with these things in isolation. Talk to somebody.
Dr. Pinkett,
Agreed. The importance of self-care, especially as we're having conversations now about mental health and all of the effects of the pandemic and isolation. My heart just goes out to those who find themselves under circumstances where they feel like there aren't very many options available to them. Our social connections, our social relationships are paramount. And it's the old metaphor, getting back to the plane, Dr. Branch, they say, put your mask on first before you try to help somebody else put on their mask. And that's metaphoric and symbolic. If you can't help yourself, you can't help anyone else. And I find oftentimes some of us can be so busy pouring into and caring for others that we lose sight of the importance of caring for ourselves. I love all of what we're talking about with self-care. You got to put yourself first. And for some that might seem selfish, but in fact, it's actually quite selfless.
Absolutely. With that, thank you so much. It was a marvelous, just absolutely outstanding conversation. I want to highlight there's an opportunity to continue the conversation this evening at 8 p.m. with a live Q&A. And so absolutely that information is in the chat and featured on the screen. Thank you both for your generosity, your authenticity, your openness, and for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. Thank you to Rutgers.